Well, India's growth story is now loud and clear to the rest of the world. But I've always believed that even though we are growing much faster, faster than any other country in the world amongst the major economies, this doesn't really reflect our real potential. And that's for the reason that we are growing, but growing in the midst of several adversities. A big adversity is that the global environment itself is unsupportive, if not obstructive. Now, this has impact on trade, this has impact on demand, this also has impact on investments. Private sector investment still not up to the mark. And I think amongst our major challenges, the state of the public sector banks, an issue which we are trying to address. Now, notwithstanding that, I think there are a combination of several factors collectively which have added to our growth. The most important one being that we've re-established the credibility of the Indian economy. It's not a stray reform here or there, but it's a series of actions in the last 2.5 years, all in one direction. And I think that's restored the credibility of decision-making process, restored the credibility of economic reforms back in India, and of course of governance. We've been able to put in a lot of public investment into infrastructure and rural India. And I think the mainstay of India's growth story is increased public investment. So infrastructure is growing and growing quite fast. I think the increased credibility of Indian economy is enabling us to attract a lot of higher foreign direct investment. Urban demand has increased. Last 2 years we had a bad monsoon. This year we have a fairly good monsoon, and therefore rural demand will also increase. So it's a combination of public investment, FDI, increased demand, which is adding to our growth story. The obstructive factors are global growth being slow. And if the global environment changes and growth returns to the world, then I think we can aim for much higher. Our domestic challenges, as far as they are, I think predominantly we are now very clear that we have to increase investments in agriculture, we have to increase investment in rural India, we have to increase investments in infrastructure. That's a consistent direction which we are following.
Correct. And since I want to get India specific, but since we're coming from the IMF headquarters and you've mentioned some of the obstructions as well, they've identified two for the world. One is Brexit, and the second one is the outcome of the US presidential elections, with one candidate being very protectionist. Do you think that these two could be obstructions for India's growth story?
Well, I think there are three important global challenges. The first you mentioned is Brexit. Now, Brexit impact was overstated. In fact, even the markets only reacted for a day and then they stabilized. Now it looks a harsh reality that the United Kingdom goes out of the European Union. It will decide its own trade policy and economic policies, etc. And I think as and when it's legally entitled to enter into trade agreements, it will start entering in various countries of the world. There's a huge amount of opportunity that I see between the United Kingdom and India entering into some kind of trade arrangements, but that's only when they are legally entitled to do so. Brexit as such doesn't adversely impact India. The US presidential election, it's a worrisome situation. Worrisome because the anger in the electorate has led to the tenor of the entire debate being protectionist. And if the world's most powerful economy turns protectionist, then for others to grow out of protection becomes all the more difficult. But then I have a hope in this. And the hope is that normally during an election campaign, extreme statements are made. When it comes to the burden of governance, that is not what is implemented. And therefore, once these political parties, irrespective of the candidate who wins, they are in government, I think the tenor of their policy would be significantly different from what the tenor of the campaign itself is. There is a third problem also. And I think increased global terrorism on account of the activities of the ISIS and what's happening in that part of the world. Now that in region after region is creating instability. For instance, if you analyze what India's challenges are, from any point of view, the border situation becomes worrisome. There is a fourth factor also, which of course doesn't directly adversely impact India but does impact the rest of the world, which is what happens to China. Now, China is a very large economy. It has done phenomenally well over the last 3 decades. It has now slowed down. The Chinese themselves are conceding that the growth now would be relatively slower than what it was in the past. Fortunately for us in India, we are not a part of the Chinese supply chain, and therefore we aren't so intrinsically linked. But when the world gets impacted, India can't remain isolated. So there are global challenges. And one of the lessons, therefore, for India to learn is to build such firewalls around its own economy that the impact of some of these global developments can be minimized as far as India is concerned.
And while we're talking about tax compliance, Mr. Finance Minister, you're going to go down in history as the finance minister that will roll out the goods and services tax. 22nd November is a deadline you have set out to sort out all the contentious issues, I would imagine, including the rates as well. By when will you take a call that the GST is going to roll out on the 1st of April? Where are we as far as preparedness go?
You see, we've been having meetings of the GST Council. And in the very first meeting, I had 5 items on the agenda. Almost 4.5 out of them got sorted out. On the second meeting, we had again 2 very important items on the agenda. They've both been sorted out. There are about 2 pending issues. And after these 2 pending issues, on the meeting on the 18th, 19th and 20th of October, we'll be taking up the rates issue. And after the rates are finalized and these 2 issues are settled, we'll approve the draft bills. Now, I hope to complete this exercise by the 22nd of November, so that we can introduce those legislations in Parliament. And if we are able to pass them in the winter session, then subject to the IT infrastructure being ready, which hopefully should be ready, we should be in a position to bring it, to roll it out on the 1st of April.
Just in case, just to understand, if it doesn't happen on 1st of April because let's say the state's IT and infrastructure is not ready, is it possible to roll out the GST mid-year, or will we have to wait another year?
The GST is not an income tax. It's a transactional tax. And a transactional tax couldn't be started on any day of the year. As far as the Constitution amendment is concerned, it got notified entirely, in its entirety, on the 16th of November 2016. The old system can continue maximum for 1 year. So in any case, there is a constitutional deadline. And I hope we don't have to resort to the deadline. We should be able to do it on the 1st of April itself.
Now, you have multilateral agencies like the IMF and the World Bank revising India's economic outlook, but you're not seeing an upgrade from rating agencies. You're not seeing them come out and talk more favorable. I know you've already said what you think of the Moody's exercise, but if I could get your views on this.
Well, I think you have rating agencies and they do their own job. At the end of the day, what is the substance of the economy that we are able to build up? That's what matters. How one of the agencies rates you or upgrades you or doesn't upgrade you is important, but it's not the end of the world.
So you're not going to give it that much importance, is what you're saying.
Well, it is important, I said, but it's not, in reality, we have to improve the performance.
Mr. Finance Minister, there's one blind spot in the economy. It's the banks, which you also said at the beginning of this interview. Credit offtake has also not been that great of late. You, for example, even had the RBI cut rates, but banks still now have not transmitted any part of that 25 basis points. What is the situation going forward? You've announced a series of steps, especially with power and steel, to bring down the NPAs. What can we expect going
not only
forward?
power, we took a monumental decision that 75% of the amount of awards must be paid to them. Well, I'm going to have a dialogue with the banks itself, and we are extremely keen that the banks transmit the benefit to the borrowers itself. Because it's only then that the economy can pick up and the burden on the borrowers goes down.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.